So thank you guys for joining us today for this month's Digging In with TPS MTSU. We're really excited to have you join us today as we look at the first industrial revolution this month. So before we kind of get into our topic for the month, a couple of housekeeping things. So first, for you folks who are joining us live, if you will remember to keep your mics muted, so it helps us have a clearer audio for the recording. And if you would go ahead and rename yourself, so your first and last name, so that helps us keep track of attendance and know who we're talking with in the chat box. And then we do want the session to be interactive. So again, for those of you joining us live, be sure to open up that chat box, introduce yourselves. Definitely feel free to ask questions and make comments throughout the presentation. We will be monitoring that and responding to those as we go through. And then feel free to use your reaction buttons. And then I know we're doing some polling today, although we're not using Zoom polling, we're going to use a different platform today. So we're going to try out something a little new during Layla's activity. But again, we do want to make these interactive. If you happen to be watching this recording later on, again, maybe think about trying to join us for one of the lives, as we do try to make this conversational as much as possible. So we keep a Padlet page for this series, and you will be able to find all of that information at this web address link or using this QR code. And each month we add the newsletter and then any resources that we've highlighted during the course of the webinar are added to that page. So again, everything is kind of in one place, and it's a great kind of one-stop shop. So with that, I am going to turn things over to my colleague, Stacey Graham, who's going to talk to us about the theme for this month.
Thanks, Kira. I am going to share my screen so that you can all see what I am talking about. So here we have our newsletter, and if you're already on our mailing list, then you may have gotten this and taken a look at it already. But if not, if this is new to you, I'm going to go over it just a little bit. We chose as our theme the first industrial revolution to differentiate it from I guess what we can call the second industrial revolution, which is probably what comes to most people's minds as far as the American History Survey goes. When you say industrial revolution in the United States, a lot of people think of the railroads, Andrew Carnegie, and John Rockefeller, and all of that. That is more associated with the Gilded Age, the second part of the 19th century, and then moving into the early 20th century. But the first industrial revolution refers to, it's a global worldwide event, and it's generally said to have started around the mid 18th century, and the places where it probably had the most steam, pardon the pun, at the beginning were England and a lot of the Low Countries of Northern Europe, that being Belgium and the Netherlands and Northern Germany, also France, and then a little bit later on, of course, it spreads throughout Southern and Eastern Europe as well as other parts of the world. And so this is a really, really, you just cannot underestimate the impact that the first industrial revolution had on traditional lifestyles, on the economics, and on political events, because there were a lot of other revolutions happening during this time period as well. American Revolution, French Revolution, and other kinds of things. And all these events are not unrelated. So this is a great way to connect what's going on in the United States with what's going on in the rest of the world, and think of it as a global event and not just something existing in one curricular area in particular. Particular because a lot of the early pioneers in the United States came to the US after, growing up and kind of learning their trade in Europe. So, for example, the DuPont family, they were from France and they moved to the United States in the year 1800. And, they started the first gunpowder mills in New Jersey. And this allowed the United States to bypass having to buy gunpowder from England, which had the best gunpowder mills at that time. And that was very important politically in the year 1800 for reasons which I think are probably obvious if you're aware of that history of that period. So that we actually have a link to a blog about the DuPont family on this important links box. Another connection, Samuel Slater, who learned a lot of the textile industry in England, where it was the most important. And he brought some of those secrets of that technology used to the United States and established the first textile mills. It was up in Rhode Island, and those are very important to US history. But he wasn't very well thought of in England for doing that. But we have an old lesson assignment, a lesson idea from a previous newsletter about Samuel Slater, and you can link to it both from the blurb, and it's the very first one in the important links box. And so October can't be with us today, but she did a lesson idea on Black inventors during the Industrial Revolution. I'm really impressed that she was able to find enough material to build this lesson, because yes, there were Black people in the first Industrial Revolution who were in the position of inventors and not just laborers. Kira's going to go over the cotton economy. Layla's going to go over inventions, and then I will mention some additional resources when they're finished with their segments. So I believe Layla is going to go first. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and let Layla talk about her lesson idea.
Okay, I'm echoing. Okay, so everybody can hear me, right? No echo? All right, cool. So my name is Layla. I see we have some East Tennessee people with us today. I'm actually in Knoxville, Tennessee. So thank you, Marcus. I am going to be sharing with y'all a lesson today on change over time, and specifically looking at inventions, innovations from the first Industrial Revolution. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I feel like I read something recently. It was like we all have to announce when we're sharing our screen. And I was very much I very much agree with that. Okay, so let me go ahead and present this for y'all. We'll just walk you through it as we go through. Okay, so again, our topic was the first Industrial Revolution, and I wanted to check out how inventions and innovations have shifted or been modified over time. So what we're going to look at first is this image, and I want y'all in the chat box to tell me what you see. Just observe this image. Do you have any background knowledge? What's going on in this image that I'm presenting? Okay. Looks like an early phone. Okay, what else do we think? It's a prototype for a phonograph phone. Okay. What do we see in this? Not just what we think it is or what we know it is. What's going on in this picture? Telephone technology, speaking. Okay. What else? People are talking back and forth through a machine. Good. Yes, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see in that middle image, there's someone with the back of their head to it. And then there's another person with their face kind of yelling like that. Good. Looks like connecting via wiring, possibly using electricity. A man yelling into a barrel with cords. Pretty much. Yeah, good. So this is just something I wanted to kind of get our brains going with. You guys, y'all are right. Let's go to the next page here. This is a sketch of the telephone design, Alexander Graham Bell's sketch. It's from the 1870s. So while this isn't from the first industrial revolution, it is a good object to start with students, I think. So I want to talk a minute about telephones. So how have telephones changed since this sketch? In the chat box, let me know. How have telephones shifted and changed since the 1870s? They've gotten smaller. They're handheld. Okay, good. What else? They're wireless. Good. We see a lot of wires connecting this image. Push button, not dialing. Okay, basically computer and unlimited range of communication. Good. They're not just yelling from one wire to the other, right? They are, but you can't really see the wires anymore, right? So this is something you can kind of get going. A push, let me see. How do you write that? Easier to use, user-friendly. Good. So a little bit different than this sketch here, but let's think for a minute. What were telephones initially designed to do? What problems were telephones trying to solve? How were telephones trying to make life easier? Good. Relay information over large distances. Okay. So if we're relaying information, what are we doing essentially? If we're relaying information from one person to another or one company to another, what are we doing? Communicating. Good. Good, Marcus. So we're communicating with one another. Good. So telephones in 1870 were meant to communicate. Maybe like Heather said, it's railroad delays, maybe shipping delays. I know some of y'all probably sign up for UPS text notifications and you get those shipping delays still. So when you're thinking about telephones and their purpose, their primary purpose in 1870 to communicate quickly and efficiently as you could in the 1870s. Let's think about how telephones have transformed. How have we modified telephones today? It's a consumer item. Okay, so it's not like they can be luxury items, but a lot of people, especially in the United States, have phones. Good. Communicating, good, quickly. What else? They're digital, so technology has changed. Okay. They're visual. Yes, a lot of it is on a screen now. When you look at older phones, what are they missing? A screen. You can't see. They have buttons, but there's no screen there. Good. They're portable. Good. They're central to how we function, right? If you leave it at home, you feel like you've forgotten something all day. At least I know I do. I feel like I'm missing something. So what do people use phones for today? We talked about how they're different. What is the purpose for phones today? Good. Entertainment, selfies. Yes. With students on TikTok. Oh, yes. What else? Research. Okay, Mike. Good. What else? So we see phones having all of these like secondary purposes, right? Texting, please do not actually call, maps, camera, right? So we have all these different functions on our phones. But the primary reason many of us still use our phones today is to communicate. We're still trying to communicate. So they have that same purpose. They've just been modified continuously to meet the needs, air quote, needs of our lives, right? To meet our constantly changing and evolving society. So telephones, I said telephones like cell phones, telephones have shifted into cell phones, right? That are basically a computer in your pocket. That is how this invention has shifted and been modified over time, these changes over time. So this is a good way to get your students involved in this first part. While this isn't a part of the first industrial revolution, this invention, it is something that has continued to be modified and impacted lives for generations. Okay. So let's think for a minute. And I want you, this is the polling aspect we're going to use. So hang with me as I explain this, okay? There is an aspect where you can text. So I want you to text that Layla Smallwood 112 at the top to the phone number 37607. And you should get some information to join. And as you're joining, I want you to think about what other inventions can you think of that have been modified over time, like that telephone. And try to think of things that maybe your students would think of or things that we use often. And I'm going to change the screen now, so you're going to see my screen flip to a different page. And that information will still be at the top of the screen. There you go. So all that information is there. So once you start sending in responses, we'll be able to see them on the screen, and it's going to make them into a word cloud. So what innovations can you think of that have been changed or modified over time? And there's a website too. If you feel more comfortable going from your computer, you can also go through there. And this is another way we're using our phones, right? We're using our phones to communicate, just throwing that out there, or our computers to communicate. So we'll take a minute and let everybody get this set up. And if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box. I'm happy to answer or discuss. All right. Is anybody having trouble? Okay, that's fine. Take your time. If you have a question, you can unmute yourself and let us know.
I sent something. We'll see if it pops up. Let me resend it.
Yeah, see if you can send it again, because you might have noticed at the top it said activate, and I forgot to hit activate. So a user error there. We're all learning as we go. Okay, so we have planes, banking, electronics, good. And you can all see this on your screen in real time as well, on the screen that I'm sharing. Good. Transportation. What else can we think of? Oh, good. Lighting. Good. And you can submit as many answers as you want. It doesn't have to be just one answer submission. So if you have more you want to throw in there, you didn't have to pick your top one. You can have at it. All right, good. News, okay. Clothing. Isn't this cool the way it's shifting? I just think it's kind of fun. Good. Medicine. Oh, good. Good one. So I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes as we're talking about this. But let's just talk about transportation, for example. In the chat box, how has transportation changed and been modified over time to meet our needs? How has transportation shifted? It's faster. Yeah, it's definitely faster. What else? Larger capacity. Okay. Do you mean you can like have more people in a transportation method or device, I guess? Good. Okay, cool, Marcus. That makes sense. Okay, so it's oh, I keep getting the resource not found. Okay, no big deal. If you want to type in the chat box what you want to say, that's totally fine too. No pressure at all. Okay, so it has a larger capacity, it's faster. What else? It's more affordable. Okay, it's not just a luxury item. Any more transportation is not just always luxury item. It's safer. Yeah, we have a Cadillac down in the museum, and no seat belts, no dashboard, no windshield. A little bit safer today. Good. Ease of access via apps like Uber. Good. Infrastructure. Right. Our infrastructure, that's something we don't have on there. It's shifted as well and changed over time. So our infrastructure has shifted and been modified as we've needed, right? As we've needed to. Good. Okay, food production, good. That'll go on our little list in a minute, Cheryl. Good. All right. Okay, so what else? Anything else? So y'all have a lot of pieces here. Let's talk about for a second, then we'll go on to our next part. Oh, the way we cook and store food. Good. Okay, so go into that food production. So the way we cook and store food has shifted. How has that shifted? How has it been modified? Salt to refrigeration. Good. Electricity. Yes. Good. We don't do as much canning. No, thank goodness. I took one canning class and gave up. So glad we don't do as much canning anymore. More shelf stable. I gotcha. Micro cooking. Is that microwave cooking? I get that. I rely on the microwave. Okay, good. So a lot of stuff has changed in regards to our food storage as well. So again, you could start with the telephone and move your way forward, ask students to think of other things if you want to really get them to kick off the discussion instead, but just a way to interact here. Okay. I'll go back. Y'all can all see my PowerPoint again, right? Cool. Okay. No, I didn't mean to do that. Let's go this way. That's what I get for hyperlinking and embedding, I guess. Okay, perfect. So let's go. Okay, perfect. So this is the standard that I was working with for this lesson idea that I kind of showed you the intro for. Explain how scientific and technological innovations led to massive social, economic, cultural, and demographic changes. So looking at all these pieces, and this is a world history standard, but really you could teach this in looking at how world history has changed or how American history has changed, how all of these pieces. I think this is a standard that could go across content areas and curriculum. So in this lesson idea, you would start with that telephone activity, or you could do a word cloud, or you could just have students talk, whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever your students feel comfortable with. And you would talk about how inventions have shifted and modified over time. Okay, and then you would have the next section where you give students, there's a student packet, and they have all of these selected images in there that are hyperlinked, or you can print these off and give these to students. And these all go back to that one standard right here. So still processing, the steam engine, new textile technology, transportation, things like that. So you have these selected images. You can give students these images and have them guess what's going on. Some of them will be pretty easy. Like we all know, for example, that's a wagon, right? More than likely your students are going to know that's a wagon. But some of these images might be a little bit more tricky. So you can hand them out to students and ask them to think about the technological innovation. What is happening here? These are all related to the first industrial revolution. So what's happening here? How did this invention shift life? How did it change society? So have them guess what it is. And then you can have students, there's a little bit more information on the pages on the student packet. You could start with being mean and just giving them the images without any detail or date and having them guess. And then you can go into having them place them on a timeline. Which one do you think came first? And that's why I have this little timeline here, because you could place these items, whether your students are doing it virtually or in person. Which item do you think, which image do you think came first? Which innovation, which invention? And they can place it on the timeline. You discuss why they think that, really dig into that thinking, and then give them the information, give them the dates. And on the student packet, on the newsletter activity, all of the dates and information are kind of a descriptor is listed for each of these images. So then you can rearrange your timeline and have students place them in the correct places. You could discuss with students why they maybe thought this thing came before this thing and they were misled. The timeline, I think, really puts it into perspective. Discuss with students as you're looking at these, how these images, these inventions mirror some of our technology in daily life today. How do these images, how do we see them reflected in our life? What's their impact in our lives today? You could get into that as well. And discuss how these inventions, just like the telephone, just like we discussed with transportation, just like we discussed with foodways, how these inventions have changed over time, how they've been modified, and have students kind of work with that. So for example, we have a wagon and a carriage. We could talk about what comes after the wagon and the carriage, right? How does transportation continue to shift? And students can place that on the timeline. This is something that you could build throughout the entire semester, honestly, looking at inventions and innovations going forward. Students could continue to add to it. And kind of discuss how modifications have shifted to continue to make life easier on these inventions. I call it a technology timeline in the newsletter idea. And I like the idea of that. You're showing how technology is shifting, how it's being modified, and how it's continuing to be used today. So to go one step further for this, you could have students pick one or two of the specific images that I just showed you on the last slide or something from their technology timeline and do an ESP activity. You can pick one or two of those to further address the technology and its impact on economic, social, and political growth. So this is something that you could have an extension activity, have students work in small groups. It could be a note catcher for different technological innovations all throughout your course as you're going forward. I know a lot of these standards are across content curriculum, so you can make it work. But this is just a great way to take it one step further. And so we're going to try the poll again. You don't have to do this, but if you have questions, you can always text your questions. I'm basically putting this in there for people who are watching this after the fact. So if you have questions and you're watching this right now, or you're watching this on YouTube later on, watching the recording, you can text to that number or go to that website at the top in the link and ask me your questions, and I will respond as I get these messages. And if you guys have questions, you can just put them in the chat box for me now. Thanks. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Kira.
Thank you, Layla. So let me pull up the right screen. Here we go. So for my lesson idea this month, I decided to do the cotton gin. And really a little bit beyond just the cotton gin, but just thinking about the larger impact of the cotton gin on both the US economy, but then also thinking about kind of its larger implications within just US history. So we're going to look at a few different things during the course of this, but I think, to begin with, we're going to start with a video. And I've included here in the PowerPoint, two different sources that you can use to help kind of build some context for your students, because I think it's really hard for them to understand just why the cotton gin is so important. And so giving them a little bit of context, one of the big things that we'll hear in this video, but I just kind of boggles the mind, is that before the cotton gin, it took one person about 10 hours to process 1 pound of cotton. And so just thinking about, again, how labor intensive it was, I think we see with the course of this, like how important the gin is, because otherwise without it, we wouldn't see cotton production the way we do. There's also a link that I use in the lesson idea in the newsletter, this Bill of Rights Institute essay that's good for context as well. And I'm going to show you guys that a little bit later. But let's start with looking at this video. And it's just a couple minutes. We're going to watch just the first part of this. And I want you guys, as we're watching it, to kind of think about what are some kind of key things that we're learning here.
Cotton is king. In 1781, a New England farm boy named Eli Whitney put together a few boards and rollers.
Many of us learned this story as children. Eli Whitney, a Yankee tinkerer, invented a machine that launched the Industrial Revolution. What we didn't learn was that Whitney's cotton gin also launched a new phase of American slavery, a phase in which ideas about Black freedom were overwhelmed by the need for Black labor. It would be the nadir of African American history. And it all started with a simple white plant.
It was economically unfeasible to grow cotton before the cotton gin, because it took one individual about 10 hours to produce 1 pound of usable cotton.
One individual, 10 hours, 1 pound.
Right.
Of clean cotton.
Right, clean cotton. And so even the first primitive gin could produce about 50 pounds of cotton in one day. And very quickly they grow until eventually they're producing thousands of pounds of cotton a day.
And this is the greatest economic boom in the history of the United
Yeah.
States.
Oh, sure. The whole country is benefiting from this, yeah.
What made cotton so desirable? A perfect storm. In the 1790s, America's oldest crops, like tobacco, were depleting farmland and dropping in value. At the same time, the textile industry in Great Britain was exploding, creating enormous international demand for cotton clothing. Eli Whitney's gin merely provided the motor for a global economic machine, and slavery was its fuel.
Everybody was getting a piece of it. All these northern bankers and marketing people, folks who owned the ships that transported the cotton, everybody was getting a piece of the pie.
Cotton utterly transformed the United States, making fertile land from Georgia to Texas extraordinarily valuable. The fact that Native Americans lived on these lands was a temporary inconvenience, solved by a policy of Indian removal. The massive replacement of native populations with slave plantations.
Okay, so that is the piece of that we're gonna watch. So thinking about what we just heard, what are some kind of key things that we might take away from that clip? You're thinking about the context of kind of why the cotton gin might be important. What are some key things? All right, so economics. So yes, there's some political implications, the link to kind of its global impact. Connection to enslavement. So yeah, so it's, the labor that's needed and how that's social disruptions. Yeah, the geographic piece of this, like understanding kind of the need to expand farmland. Native, connections to native removal. So there's a lot of different pieces that kind of fit into understanding, again, the wider significance of the cotton gin and what it does. And I think that, again, sometimes, we may not realize just how impactful it was that, arguably it may be the most important invention in the first industrial revolution. So in this lesson idea, we are going to look at a couple of different sources. So the first one we're going to look at is the memoir of Eli Whitney. And it was written in 1846, or it was published by Denison Olmsted, who was actually a scientist by training, but he wrote several different books, many of them kind of more science in nature. But then he wrote this memoir, which I really would like to dig into and know kind of why he did this one, so it seems very different than the other things that I saw that listed that he had written. But what's really interesting is, of course, it's probably one of the most influential things that he wrote. And it's really going to kind of change our historical memory and understanding of Whitney a little bit. And I'll talk about that a little more after we look at the excerpts we're going to look at here. So in the lesson idea, I include, there's 4 pages, but for today, we're going to look really kind of just 4 passages from those 4 pages instead of the entirety of all of them. And I know this might be a little difficult to read, so I'm going to read aloud the four sections that are outlined here in red. And as I go through, we'll stop at each one and we'll kind of talk about what are some key things that we're learning about. So these passages start, and Eli Whitney has traveled down to Georgia, and he's been hanging out with the Green family. Actually, he had just gotten inoculated with smallpox before he went down. And so they're kind of waiting for him to work his way through the reaction to the vaccine that he might have gotten. And so that's kind of happened. And now there's kind of a large party of people who have gathered there at the Greens estate. And so they're going to have a conversation here is how this starts off. So These men, they fell into conversation upon the state of agriculture among them and expressed great regret that there was no means of cleaning the green seed cotton or separating it from its seed, since all the lands which were unsuitable for the cultivation of rice would yield large crops of cotton. But until ingenuity could devise some machine which would greatly facilitate the process of cleaning, it was in vain to think of raising cotton for market. Separating 1 pound of the clean staple from the seed was a day's work for a woman, but the time usually devoted to picking cotton was the evening, after the labor of the field was over. Then the slaves, men, women, and children, were collected in circles with one whose duty it was to rouse the dozing or quicken the indolent. All right. So thinking about this first passage, what are some key things that we're learning about the kind of the context of what's going on with Eli Whitney here? Maybe something that stands out to you in that passage. Right, this mention that they couldn't grow rice, so maybe they could grow cotton here in this land. Yeah, that there was going to need to be change or innovation in order to make something prosperous. Yeah, and he's listening to these men talk about kind of the state of things, right? They're sitting around complaining about we've got all this good land, but we can't grow rice on it, and cotton's a problem because of the labor that's required, and this just isn't working. So again, he's listening to kind of the talk of the landowners and the farmers around there about kind of what's going on. Yeah, the use of the word indolent there is a choice. So kind of some key things that we might take away from that passage. So on the next page, but a new turn that no one of the company dreamed of had been given to Mr. Whitney's views. It being of season for cotton in the seed, he went to Savannah and searched among the warehouses and the boats until he found a small parcel of it. This he carried home and communicated his intentions to Mr. Miller, who warmly encouraged him and assigned him a room in the basement of the house, where he set himself to work with such rude materials and instruments as a Georgia plantation afforded. With these resources, however, he made tools better suited to his purpose and drew his own wire, of which the teeth of the earliest gins were made, an article which was not at the time to be found in the market of Savannah. Mrs. Green and Mr. Miller were the only persons ever admitted to his workshop, and the only persons who knew in what way he was employing himself. The many hours he spent in his mysterious pursuits afforded matter of great curiosity and often raillery to the younger members of the family. Near the close of the winter, the machine was so nearly completed so as to no doubt to be a success. So yeah, so people are wondering kind of what's he doing in this basement here? Kind of squirreled away, working in secret. No one really knows what he's doing except for these two folks. What else stands out to us? Yeah, he's painted as a hardworking man. And if you look at some of the other passages, it talks about, Mrs. Green is, constantly flattering him about how inventive he is, and he could create and invent anything, could build anything. Yeah, it does make note that he has to make his own tools since they don't exist, which we're going to get back to that in a minute, because the thing that I read yesterday really kind of puts some of that into context. It makes me question some of this. Yeah, he spends many hours here in this, in this workshop that he's, that he's borrowed from Mr. Miller. So we know Whitney's kind of in this basement trying to make something. So again, we're pretty sure by the winter they think that he's, pretty close to having something that's going to work. So Mrs. Green, therefore, invited to her house gentlemen from different parts of the state. And on the first day after they had assembled, she conducted them to a temporary building, which had been erected for the machine. And they saw with astonishment and delight that more cotton could be separated from the seed in one day by the labor of a single hand that could be done in the usual manner in the space of many months. Mr. Whitney might now have indulged in bright Rivieras of fortune and of fame, but we shall have various opportunities of seeing that he tempted his inventive genius with an unusual share of the calm, considerate qualities of the financier. Although urged by his friends to secure a patent and devote himself to the manufacture and introduction of his machines, he coolly replied that on account of the great expense and trouble which always attends the introduction of a new invention, and the difficulty of enforcing a law in favor of patents, in opposition to the individual interest of so large a number of persons as would be concerned in the culture of this article, it was with great reluctance that he should consent to relinquish the hopes of a lucrative profession, for which he had been destined, with an expectation of indemnity either from the justice or the gratitude of his countrymen, even should the invention answer the most sanguine anticipation of his friends. So that last paragraph is a super wordy way of saying what? Right, saying he could have made tons of money, but he's gonna pass. Just gonna make a pass here. It's not necessary. Which again, when we think about it, like he's inventing the machine that is possibly going to be the most influential and have the most impact of any during the first industrial revolution. So you would think that he would get rich off this, right? Well, let's keep reading on and we'll talk a little bit more about this patent. So an invention so important to the agricultural interest and has proved to every department of human industry could not long remain a secret. The knowledge of it soon spread through the state, and so great was the excitement on the subject that multitudes of persons came from all quarters of the state to see the machine. But it was not deemed safe to gratify their curiosity until the patent right had been secured. But so determined were some of the populace to possess this treasure that neither law nor justice could restrain them. They broke into the building by night and carried off the machine. In this way, the public became possessed of the invention, and before Mr. Whitney could complete his model and secure his patent, a number of machines were in successful operation, constructed with some slight deviation from the original, with the hope of evading the penalty for violating the patent right. As soon as the co-partnership of Miller and Whitney was formed, Mr. Whitney repaired to Connecticut, which was actually where he was from, where as far as possible he was to perfect the machine, obtain a patent, and manufacture and ship for Georgia such a number of machines as would supply the demand. So what do we learn in that passage about his kind of quest to patent this, and maybe why he, why he wasn't thrilled to have to try after trying to get a patent? Right, so one, he has to complete it, right? There's the, he has to have the drawings, he has to have a prototype to actually like submit with his patent. So he's still working on all of that, getting that part completed. And in the process, while, Mrs. Green and Mr. Miller kind of showing off what he's created, all these people have heard about it and are so excited about it that basically they show up to see it and then steal it or steal portions of it and then go off to create their own. And again, they make mention here that they create just enough differences between these new inventions that they can't, they wouldn't be in violation of a patent if Whitney were to be able to get the patent. So where this gets really interesting is that yesterday when I was doing some reading about the memoir, so it turns out that there were some contemporary accounting of the time that there were actually a number of people who were working on kind of different gin type things. But they had like different combs and stuff that they were using. Like Whitney's is definitely a little bit different, but there were a number of people that were working on a similar type invention. But when this memoir comes out and kind of the way that Olmsted tells the story, it basically erases all that previous accounting of different versions of a gin that was at work, and lays claim that Whitney's was the one and everyone else just stole his idea. Whereas it's probably not really the case. There are probably other similar ones, and then Whitney's again was just a little bit different, a little bit better, but there were a number of people that were working on trying to fix this problem of being able to process cotton more quickly. So I thought that was really interesting. And that again, because this memoir has been so influential over time, it's actually kind of changed kind of our understanding of who created the cotton gin. So with all that in mind, again, so Whitney is able to, create his patent, and he submits that, and you can actually see this. This is from the National Archives. This one is. So he gets the patent the first time around. But then when he goes in about 20 years later to reissue the patent, he actually gets denied. And so he actually never makes a lot of money off this, which I find really interesting. So you have the patent that you could, or the patent sketcher that you could show with your students and kind of ask them kind of how they think it might work and kind of what they notice here when they're looking at it. The other source that we're going to look at is this letter from Thomas Jefferson. And so this is from right around the time that he's finishing up creating the cotton gin. So word's starting to get out, and he's trying to get that patent. And so we're just going to really make note here of this second paragraph. And Jefferson writes to him and says, as the state of Virginia, of which I am, carries on household manufactures of cotton to a great extent, as I also do myself, and one of our great embarrassments is the clearing of the cotton of the seed. I feel a considerable interest in the success of your invention for family use. Permit me, therefore, to ask information from you on these points. Has the machine been thoroughly tried in the ginning of cotton, or is it as yet but a machine of theory? What quantity of cotton has it cleaned on an average of several days and worked by hand, and by how many hands? What will be the cost of one of them made to be worked by hand? Favorable answers to these questions would induce me to engage one of them to be forwarded to Richmond for me. Wishing to hear from you on the subject, I am. So what can we tell about Jefferson's interest in this machine? He has some pretty pointed questions here. So he wants to know if it's cost effective. Yeah. So again, what's the cost of it going to be? A series of questions. So yeah, how well is it going to work? Yeah, I mean, generally Jefferson was pretty excited about, inventions overall, like that, Yeah, so he's intrigued. He's also asking about, is this somebody else's idea? Which again kind of gets into this whole the thing that I was mentioning before, that there were other people who are working on things that again we don't know their names, which I find fascinating. But yeah, so he wants to know again, is it a machine? Have you actually tried it out? Do we know that it works? How much can we get done in a day? How many people are going to be needed to use to run it? Is it going to help him to be more competitive, agriculturally from other farmers in Virginia? Yeah, he's ready to get one though. He's like, you go ahead and send that right on to me. Let me get started on that. I do find it interesting that he uses this phrase for family use, when we all know, of course, that they were trying to get this so that they could begin to mass produce, so they could send cotton to the markets in England to be able to have cotton for their textile mills. But yeah, so I thought that is fascinating. Yes, supposedly it was a family farm. Sure. All right, so let me show you a couple of other things that you could pull in from that lesson idea, just real quickly here. Too many things open on my computer here at the moment. All right, so in the lesson idea, you'll note that I've also linked in here a newspaper article. And just real quickly, I want to show you this. We're not going to have time to read it today, but this is also cool because some of the newer newspaper pages in the Library of Congress allow you to do this clipping like this, and then you can save the clipping. Makes it so much easier for student use. But this clip here, this is from 1790, so this is a little bit before the invention of the cotton gin. But it talks about essentially like how this, how Pennsylvania has been impacted by industrialization. And so as it goes on to describe like the different things that they've built, kind of gives you a sense of like the infrastructure that's already in place, so that again, once the cotton gin has been invented, it becomes to be widespread in use. We see that explosion of production of cotton. And then you could also, of course, tie in imagery. If we think about local, within our state, Memphis, of course, is going to be very impacted. It becomes essentially like one of the key ports from which cotton can be moved in the Mid-South region, then to like other port areas like New Orleans. And then the last thing I want to bring up and show you, because I thought this was really cool. This is in that Bill of Rights essay that I mentioned at the first slide. But they have this chart, and I think again this really drives home the huge impact of having that cotton gin. So we see here again at the beginning, 1790, like just when it's being invented, that there's very little cotton that's being produced. And then over the course of the next decades, again, as we start to get all the things in place, we have, there are more gins out there, we have more land that's being cultivated, we're having more enslaved people who's providing the labor. And then we see really just an explosion within the production of cotton. And then if we think about, working in Native American removal, by the time we get to the 20s and 30s, again, we see that that's increasing even more. And of course, that is about the time that we're starting to move all of the Native people from the Southeast west of the Mississippi. And so this chart really kind of drives home again just how much the cotton gin changed the agricultural economy. And again, going back to the video we heard at the beginning, that also, of course, impacts, the banks, shippers. So it was not just agriculture in the South, but it really impacts the global economy. So hopefully that gives you guys some things to think about in relation to the gin and how the cotton gin was so important to the first industrial revolution. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn things over to Stacy to share with us some other resources.
All right, thanks. We only have a few minutes left, and I'm going to use those to show you some of the other resources that we also managed to cram into this newsletter. We make very dense newsletters every month. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so we're back on the newsletter that I was showing you before. And, like a lot of our newsletters, this has 4 different lesson ideas. I mentioned the first one. We just went through Kira's and Layla's. The 4th one is another world history one that really focuses on specific sites in Europe. But this also has a public history component because it's looking at sites that are part of a modern heritage trail. So this is kind of heritage tourism in Europe. And these sites that have been preserved, turned into museums. And so you can actually go there today. And so there's a whole website devoted to what they call the European Route of Industrial Heritage. And so I'm just going to click on that so you can see it takes you to another website. We are using cookies. Okay. And so they just have hundreds of sites across Europe. And then they have some that are particularly important that they call anchor sites throughout, Europe, mostly kind of concentrating in the northern and western parts. And so I selected 5 of those sites and found some historical sources that talk about their importance as producers during the Industrial Revolution, their particular webpage within the European Route of Industrial Heritage website, a historical map that allows you to look at some of the geographical features that may have contributed to the particular industry, trying to go at a variety of different kinds of industries. So New Lanark, for instance, is a really big it's not only a textile producing mill, but it was established by Robert Owen as this kind of utopian workers community. So it's a very interesting one in Scotland. The Museum de Croequys, which is in the Netherlands, that is a hydroelectric pump. Pilsner Brewery in the Czech Republic, beer producing. Waltham Abbey Royal Gunpowder Mills. Again, I mentioned the gunpowder in England. Krakow Salt Works, that's in Krakow, Poland, the salt mining. Some of these had actually, like, for instance, the salt mines, people have been mining salt there for hundreds of years. But it was during this era of the first industrial revolution that a lot of these sites took on new kinds of mechanisms, new kinds of automation, new kinds of reorganization of labor and production, which very much tells the story of the first industrial revolution and brings new kind of production patterns to these industries. So that's another World History High School one there. And then on page 4, we always have 4 additional sources. And so these are actually really important ones that could all be lesson plans in their own right. You know, I think that the word gaslighting is thrown around a lot these days and people have no idea where it came from. But we're not talking about that kind of gaslighting. We're talking about actual lighting with gas. So talking about that and what a difference that makes in terms of what you can have in terms of urban cityscapes and people, you know, domestic practices and that kind of thing. Waterway innovations. The Erie Canal is a really huge structure that was just incredibly important to the Industrial Revolution in the United States. And that's from the 1820s, connecting different important ports up in the Northeast and Midwest. The Morse telegraph, of course, Samuel F.B. Morse sending the very first one in 1844, again, going back to the communications that Layla was talking about. And then this last one, Jacquard looms. And of course, Jacquard, Joseph Marie Jacquard, he was a Frenchman who, he was living in Lyon in France, which was a big silk weaving area. And he invented this machine that you put on top of the loom. And it worked with a series of punched cards that created the patterns that would appear in the material, in the fabric, while it was being woven on these looms. And so it was extremely important to textile production during the first Industrial Revolution. And it was also, of course, it gave Charles Babbage the idea to use the same, you know, the punched cards and the idea of just programming, you know, interchangeable programs in a machine, which led to eventually our first computers. Now this links to 2 different blog sites, and I'm going to show them to you. Of course, this black bar is just not going away, so I may not be able to click on the second one because it's just not going away. But so the first one actually talks about computer science and programming with punched cards, and you can see what that looks like today in the modern weaving industry. You can from these images right here. Also, there's this kind of view where if you click on that, you can get a little bit closer up and see here these punched cards. And these are obviously the warp and the weft of the threads. So that's a really nice kind of blog article from the Library of Congress website. And it's got some really great newspaper articles that it links to as well that talks about this machine and how it kind of affected, you know, production. And the last thing I'm going to show you is, I'm going to have to get there. The other blog article that's linked to from this particular source, which is cool, you know, right? Is here we have a picture of Jacquard, and in the background, a picture of the loom with the machine on it. But the cool thing about this, which you can't really tell in a digital version, this is an actual textile created by a jacquard loom. So if you turn this over, the back of it looks like this. And so this thing is a textile instead of, you know, an illustration, an engraving, or a lithograph or something like that. It was actually made using the machine in the background in the picture. And so here you have a librarian talking about, you know, when he found it, and it's actually quite large. You can see it on his desk there. So that's just a really cool primary source within primary source almost. All right. Did we have some follow-up stuff that we wanted to
Yeah, I've got a couple closing things here.
All right, back to you.
All right, so just again, a quick reminder that we'll add everything that we have mentioned here on the Padlet, so be sure to take a look at that. And then finally, if you would, for those of you today, if you want to complete our short survey, we'll drop that link in the chat box. And again, that's how you are going to get credit for your attendance today. So be sure to fill that out. And then for those of you who may be watching later on, you can also fill out that same form. And we check those weekly and send out PD certificates for those who have viewed these sessions about once a week. So again, you can definitely get credit for watching this session or for any of our sessions. And again, we want to thank you guys for joining us today. We will be back next month on November the 11th. And next month, we're going to be talking about landmark Supreme Court cases. I know I spent the afternoon studying about Marbury versus Madison. So definitely want to join us for that. Let us know. We'll be happy to add you to our list. And then we have a number of other things that are coming up. So be sure to check our website, mtsu.edu/tps. And you can find our upcoming workshops listed there. So again, thank you guys so much. And we hope to see you next month.